So as some of you know, I wear a couple different hats. I am an attorney, I have a position here, but one of the other positions I have is I am also an adjunct professor at High Point University. So this was the first week of the semester. So in honor of a new semester of teaching, I thought we would start out with a test. I don't want to hear any boos out there. So this is part, though, of the Sharon Melamed questionnaire. And we're only going to do 4 questions. But the key to these questions, you're going to score yourself, but then you have to do some math. So if you need to get a calculator out on your phone, go ahead and do that now. Or if you need a piece of paper to try and add up your test scores. But you need to keep a running cumulative score. And this is how the scoring will go, and I'm going to leave this up there while we go through it. If the answer to your question is almost always, you give yourself 7 points. If it is very frequently, 6 points. Quite frequently, 5, sometimes 4, quite infrequently, 3, very infrequently, 2, almost never 1. So you got the scoring down, right? And again, you need to keep a running total of your questions. Now, there's only 4 of them, so you got to add 4 times. I know that might be a lot for you, but I think you can do it. Like I said, if you need to, get your cell phones out to the calculator on there. At most, you're going to have 28 points. I hope you can maybe do that in your head. So, here we go. The first question. I feel fed up. Almost always. Very frequently. So figure out how often you feel fed up. You got your score? Second question. I feel like my emotional batteries are dead. You have your score, now add it to your first score and keep that running cumulative total. Third question. I feel burned out. How often is that? And no, there's actually not an answer higher than almost always. So that's the best you can do if you are in that category. Final question. I feel emotionally fatigued. Add all those up. Now don't yell your total out. That might not be appropriate. But do you have the total in your head? You see, according to this survey, if your 4-question total was in the range of 12 to 16, you need help, according to this survey. Dr. Sharon, who helped to create it, said that men who average between 3 and 3.75 points per question on average, and women who average between 3.6 and 4, I'm not quite sure why the women get a higher score, maybe it's because they're more emotionally sound than us men. But if you are in that category per question, then you are at the high end of the burnout range and need help to avoid that. And those were just the emotional questions of this quiz. I didn't even get into the 8 other questions, mainly because I didn't think we could do that much math in our head. But the 8 other questions that deal with physical fatigue or cognitive weariness. But I'll tell you the questions. We're not going to go through the math, but those questions are, I feel tired. I feel physically fatigued. I feel physically exhausted. When I get up in the morning to go to work, I have no energy. I feel I'm not thinking clearly. I have difficulty concentrating. My thinking process is slow. I have difficulty thinking about complex things. Anyone depressed yet? Because wait, we're going to get to depression here in a minute, but you're not alone. You see, life comes at us with hits and hurts that drain us to the point of being dry. See, there's a study from the University of Washington which tried to get a handle on our emotional limits by talking in terms of life change units. For example, the death of a spouse was rated at 100 life change units. Divorce, 73. Being in jail, 63. A major illness registered at 53 life change units, and so on. And this study concluded that no one can stand more than 300 life change units in any 12-month period without suffering from a physical or an emotional breakdown within the next 2 years. The point of all these studies is pretty simple. We all have realities in our life that can emotionally deplete us, that can drain us, that can get us to the point of being burnt out. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, Lord, I just want to ask that you help us to not get to that point, to realize when we're close to a point of being burned out, and to help us know what you would have us to do to avoid that. In your Son's name, amen. So we've been in this series called Fit for Life, and look at some of the major areas of our life that we need to care for. Care for, mainly because if we want to live life the way it should be lived, the way it was meant to be lived, we need to do this. And it's not so much about New Year's resolutions. It's about an entirely new way of doing life. A way that positions us to thrive and to flourish. To be healthy and whole. And to finish well at the end. Last week we talked about what it takes to get and to stay spiritually fit. Today we're going to look at what it means to be emotionally fit. And not just for a season, but for life. But before I begin, I do want to say a word about depression, because that's different than emotional exhaustion. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, depression goes beyond emotional depletion. When you have a persistent, sad, anxious, or empty mood, a loss of interest or pleasure in activities, including sex, or over a sustained period of time, ongoing restlessness, irritability, excessive crying, continued feelings of guilt, worthlessness, helplessness, hopelessness, pessimism that you just can't shake. If you have persistent physical symptoms that don't respond to treatment, such as headaches, digestive disorders, and chronic pain, then you may be dealing with something more than just emotional exhaustion. You're probably dealing with some form of depression. And you need help that will go beyond what we will talk about today. And you need to get that help. You see, clinical depression is a medical disability which needs medical attention. And this isn't talked about all that often in a church setting, even though it probably should be. Clinical depression is one of 4 diseases that physicians call mood disorders. Just as diabetes has to do with the body's failure to regulate blood sugar, mood disorders come from the brain's failure to regulate chemicals that control the mood. Specifically, nerve cells in the brain communicate with each other by releasing chemicals called neurotransmitters. When there's an ample supply of these neurotransmitters, then you typically feel normal. Now, you can still have your ups and your downs, but you're not fighting an illness called depression. But in clinical depression, fewer of these neurotransmitters are released because the first nerve cell reabsorbs them before they're adequately stimulated the other nerve cells. Antidepressant medication works because they increase the amount of these neurotransmitters in the body. There is absolutely nothing to be ashamed of for taking antidepressants. It's a physical deficiency that can and should be addressed. Those afflicted with depression should not feel any more awkward about taking an antidepressant than a diabetic would feel about taking insulin. And anyone who would try to make someone feel like that's a badge of dishonor or a spiritual failure or something that would be awkward to talk about either needs to be educated or, put it bluntly, told to shut up. But that brings us back to emotional depletion. Emotional exhaustion, which, let's be honest, affects everyone. Sometimes people confuse depression with emotional exhaustion. Those that are really just exhausted may feel like they need an antidepressant. So they may take an antidepressant when what they really need is to have their emotional tank filled. And a lifestyle that keeps it filled. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Not that rises to the level of depression, but deals with just emotional exhaustion. How can we be emotionally fit for life? You see, our lessons are going to be disarmingly simple, and they're going to be perhaps so disarmingly simple that you might try to dismiss them because of their simplicity. But that's what will, if you do so, that's what's going to keep you emotionally in that ditch that you find yourself in. Now let me warn you right now. Do not be disarmed by the simplicity of what we're going to talk about. Because chances are, you're not doing at least one of these things in your life. And if you're like most people, probably not doing any of the three of the things that we're going to talk about. And that's why you feel the way you do. The lessons are going to come from the life of a man in the Bible who was schooled on this by God himself. His story is told very plainly and very transparently in the Old Testament. I like to call him a depressed saint. His name was Elijah. Probably one of the most celebrated and revered of all the Old Testament prophets. He lived during a time when people were chasing after false gods, worshiping idols, and dabbling in all kinds of pagan and occult activity. But God chose Elijah to be his spokesperson in the midst of that culture, his representative, his prophet to those people at that time. And if you want to talk about somebody who had a good run, Elijah was your man. God empowered him to call for rain to end for 3 years, and then to ask that the rain come back, simply by voicing those commands. During a famine, he touched a jar of flour, and that jar miraculously never went empty. He touched a jug of oil, and it never ran dry. He even raised a young boy from the dead, one of the very few people other than God and Jesus himself to raise someone from the dead. Elijah was a prophet's prophet. And the climax came at a place called Mount Carmel. There Elijah went head to head with 450 of the prophets of the false god and idol, Baal. It was a dramatic showdown, a cultural Super Bowl of the day. And here's the setup. See, Elijah went to the king of the land and prompted by God and said to him, "You've come to think that this Baal is God. But I say to you, the Lord is God. So let's settle it. You get everyone in Israel together, because as king you can do that. And let's meet out on Mount Carmel. Then we'll get 2 bulls. We'll cut them up for a sacrifice. But we won't burn them ourselves. We'll each pray to our respective God to do the burning for us. And even though there are 450 of you and only 1 of me, let's have this challenge." So the king looks at the odds, 450 prophets to just 1 guy, and thinks, that sounds like a pretty good deal. So the prophets of Baal went first. They called on their God from morning to noon. Nothing happened. They danced around the altar. Still, nothing happened. They shouted and they screamed, "Baal, answer us." But nothing happened. Let's pick up the story there. At noon, Elijah began to taunt them. Maybe not the most Christian thing to do, but it worked on this occasion. "Shout louder," he said. "Surely he is a god. Perhaps he's deep in thought, or busy, or traveling. Maybe he's sleeping and must be awakened." So they shouted louder and slashed themselves with swords and spears as was their custom, until their blood flowed. Midday passed, and they continued their frantic prophesying until the time for the evening sacrifice. But there was no response. No one answered. No one paid attention. Then was Elijah's turn. He arranged the wood on the altar, put the bull on the altar, and then he did something that probably wouldn't appear very smart to us. He took some water and he soaked the wood and the altar. 3 different times he did that. So much so that there was now a trench of water around the altar. Because he wanted to make sure that no one could accuse this of being some trick or deceit. Then this is what happened. We'll pick it up in the book of 1 Kings. Then the prophet Elijah stepped forward and prayed, "O Lord, God of Abraham and Isaac and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, that I am your servant and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, O Lord, answer me so that these people will know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again." Then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil, and also licked up the water that was in the trench. When all the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, "The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God." Elijah then ordered the people to seize the prophets of Baal. All in all, not a bad day for a prophet, wouldn't you say? And as you would imagine, Ahab the king was none too pleased as to how that day went, but neither was his wife. And let's be honest, she wore the pants in that family. She was the real source of evil. And when I say her name, you'll recognize it. Jezebel. Yes, the Jezebel. The one whose name is used as a euphemism for evil, treachery, and deceit. She sent Elijah a very simple message. You are a dead man. Now you'd think after all that God had just done, would have had absolutely no effect on Elijah. but it did. You see, his emotional tank was dry. He was wasted. The entire run of events had left him emotionally spent. He'd gone as hard as he could and couldn't run anymore. His life and work, ministry and effort, responsibilities and duties, deadlines and demands had left him completely drained. And this is what it says happened next. Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. He came to a broom tree, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. "I've had enough, Lord," he said. "Take my life." Then he lay down under the tree and fell asleep. That's how being emotionally drained works. It leaves you empty, spent, tapped out. For Elijah, it meant discouragement and fear, even wishing that he was dead. Let's be honest, a lot of us have been there, haven't we? You're emotionally wasted, just vulnerable. Not just to discouragement, but to whatever promises us an out. A quick infusion of an emotional feeling. When you're pushed to the limit and drained dry, you desperately want to feel better. You look for comfort. You want to feel good, so you search for a release. You look for anything that will give your emotions a quick jolt. And when your tanks are empty, you can be drawn to stuff that you would never be drawn to before. Things that never looked good start to look good. Which is why people who are drained can often start to look at pornography, or open themselves up to an affair, or go on a drinking binge. So what did God do? What did God do for his prophet, Elijah? How did God react? After all that God had done, should it be possible that God could have reacted in anger? That would be one of our emotions in that situation. I can imagine saying, "Elijah, look at all I've just done for you. How can you be discouraged now?" See, this, how God actually reacted, is what's so informative. And what God did sounds so simple, but you have to pay attention to. He did 3 different things. The first thing that God did was to care for Elijah physically. This is what the Bible says. All at once, an angel touched him, meaning Elijah, and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and there by his head was a cake of bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank, then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." So he got up and ate and drank. You know what? I love that scene. That God sends an angel just to give him a meal. That's how much our God cares about us. And the line where the angel says, "The journey is too much for you," that wasn't condemnation. That was compassion and empathy. God is saying through that angel, I know what you're going through. I know what you're feeling. That's completely overwhelming. Isn't that true for us at times? Do you ever have those times when you say, "This journey is too much for me"? The first thing that God did, first thing that God would say to you in that situation, that when you are at the end of your rope, that he understands you, and he cares. And he wants to tell you to do one and only one thing first. Stop running and rest. God knew that Elijah was tired and hungry. So he fed him. And then put him to sleep. Put him to bed. I'd like to think he even tucked in there. When Elijah got back up, God fed him again. And then put him back to bed. Do you ever think that that might be God's prescription for you? And because it's God's prescription, it's perfectly legal and valid to do. You know how many people say that they feel guilty when they rest? That's insane. Rest isn't weird. Not resting is weird. A book by Dr. Martin Moore Eddy called The 24-Hour Society. In this book, he describes a society that never rests, never sleeps, never quits, and never stops. The problem is that we are not built for a world that we have made. Because the world that we have made ignores the laws of our limits. We need rest. We need sleep. And if we don't get it, our bodies will start to break down. And then our emotions will follow, or what more commonly happens, you'll keep going physically, but you're dead inside. In other words, your emotions go out before your body does, most times. And that's common. You're soldiering on, saying, I'm fine, but you're really like the Walking Dead. If you are to be fit for life emotionally, you will take care of your body, particularly in regard to rest. So none of this, I'm too busy to sleep language. We're not too busy to follow God's prescription. A second prescription that God does. Let's look at what he said next. The Lord said, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. And Elijah heard it. It's one of my favorite passages. You see, in Elijah's depressed, discouraged, depleted condition, God showed Elijah exactly where to find him. It wasn't in the activity. It wasn't in the efforts. It wasn't in the full court press. God said to Elijah, you're going to find me and hear me in the quiet and in the stillness. You haven't been going there much, Elijah. And yet you're wondering why you feel this. When was the last time that you were alone and quiet and spent time with God? Time that really allowed you to pray, to be reflective, and to listen for his gentle whisper. Because he's not found in the wind or the earthquakes or the fire, much less the noise and the busyness and activity and the speed of our lives. He's found in the stillness, the quiet, the whisper. in the silent movement of his Spirit over the waters of our soul. We talked about this last week in terms of being spiritually fit. And by the way, you'll find that a lot of these areas overlap with one another. But this is more than just about a daily devotional time with God. It's about a life that seeks out spiritually and emotionally replenishing experiences. And here's something that very few people realize. You can drain your emotional tank real quick, but filling it is another matter. I once heard it talked about and described as like a car battery. If I take a car and turn on its lights, it's air conditioned, which means you know it's not my car, the radio and every other electronic equipment in the car, and you turn over the starter but you don't start it, your battery will be dead in about 5 minutes or so. And there's 2 ways to get your car's battery charged back up and ready to go. The first way is known as a quick charge. A quick charge gets your battery up and running in a short amount of time, but if you do it too much, it will burn out the plates in the battery and it will actually shorten the life of your battery. The second method is the better method, called a trickle charge. It puts energy back in slowly over time. Often takes 6 to 8 hours, usually overnight. And it puts energy back in slowly to avoid burnout. Your life is no different. You can try and quickly charge by escaping into porn or an affair or drinking or drugs or eating or online games. That's not the best method. What's best is a trickle charge, which means a life that takes regular, God-centered Sabbath. Something that a lot of people don't get and sometimes misunderstand. But it's one of the 10 Commandments, so we should figure it out. Exodus 20 tells us this. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work. I want to take a couple minutes and unpack that, because I think it's easy for even us as Seventh-day Adventists to miss some of this verse. The word Sabbath, it does not mean Saturday or Sunday or any other day for that matter, even a worship service. The word Sabbath literally means to cease, to stop, to quit, to rest. So if we look at that verse again, and everywhere you see the word Sabbath, replace it with the word rest. Remember the rest day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a rest day to the Lord your God. The Sabbath originated at creation, when God created a day dedicated to rest. That day was the 7th day, which is why we worship on the 7th day. Sabbath doesn't mean Saturday. It means a day of rest. God chose Saturday as that day of rest. When Christianity began to spread, there was a movement towards moving away from Saturday as that day to Sunday, because they say that was the day that Jesus arose. And that has been a tradition for many Christian denominations for 2,000 years. But God designated the 7th day as the correct day to rest. He never changed it. We, men, have changed. The key is to make that day holy. And holy means something different, set apart, unique, unlike anything else, not like other times. Which means during this time, don't hurry, don't work, don't labor. Don't fill it with your regular work and daily duties, but instead, let God flow into you in every possible way. This is why people have gathered for worship and teaching and fellowship at least one day a week as part of their Sabbath from the beginning. And it's not just about a time for a spiritual shot in the arm, but an emotional one too. In other words, you are to rest and renew. Which means do something on that day that puts gas back into your emotional tank. And this is where some people, I think, go off the path. It's not just the absence of work or hurry, but the presence of that which fills you. It could mean many different activities for many different people. If it builds your relationship with Christ, then it is appropriate to do on the Sabbath. I once heard a professor from Andrews University give this example. He lived on a river, and downstream from his house was the church. So on Sabbath mornings, he would often get in his canoe and canoe to the church, listening to the birds and looking at the foliage and hearing the peace of the river going. Is there anything wrong with that? Absolutely not. But if on Saturday afternoon his neighbors are having a canoe race, and he goes out and joins in the canoe race, is that appropriate on the Sabbath? No. It's not the activity. Both were canoeing. There was nothing wrong with the activity. It had to do with, was one, building up your relationship with Christ or not. That canoe race had nothing to do with your relationship with Christ. It had to do with competition with your neighbors. So it could be walking. It could be running. It could be canoeing. It could be hiking. Whatever it is, it helps to build your relationship with Christ. It's appropriate on the Sabbath. I like how John Ortberg describes it. He says, eat foods you love to eat. Listen to music that moves your soul. Read books that refresh your spirit. Wear clothes that make you happy. Surround yourself with beauty. And as you do these things, give thanks to God for his wonderful goodness. That is a Sabbath. And you need one every 7 days. Are you doing that? And if you're not, are you willing to start? But remember, there's still one more thing that God wanted to do for Elijah. One more prescription to write. So let's keep reading. Go back the way you came and go to the desert of Damascus. When you get there, anoint Hazael, king over Aram. Also anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, king over Israel. And anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat, from Abel-Meholah, to succeed you as a prophet. Jehu will put to death any who escape the sword of Hazael, and Elisha will put to death any who escape the sword of Jehu. Now you might be saying, what? How is that a prescription? But one of the things that had drained Elijah emotionally was that he was utterly, terribly alone. Really, if you study his life, he was alone in almost everything that he did. He had no support, no encouragement, no one to stand by his side or to watch his back. So what did God do? He told Elijah to invite some people into his relational orbit. People who would join with him, help him, and stand with him. God would say the same thing to each of us. Who are you letting into your life right now to help you do life? I'm going to speak for a second to us guys. We struggle with this. We like to say, I don't need anybody to help me with my life. Guys, we can be idiots sometimes. That shows that you haven't done a whole lot of life yet. You need to grow up. And it's not a sign of weakness. You talk to guys and ask them about when they felt their best. And some will say, it was back when I was playing sports in school. Our team was so close. I really miss that. So you were thriving when you were part of a team. Or you talk to a person who's been in the military, and they'll say that their platoon, there's nobody they were ever closer to, would have given their lives for each other. And it was probably when they felt the most alive. They were most alive when they were doing life as a group of men. Do I really have to spell this out, guys? Have you ever stopped to think why men do best in teams? We need each other. We do our best when we're part of a team. And women, you need people too. Do you have a spiritual friend, someone who is following Christ, who will encourage you to keep following Christ? You have a mentor? Do you have someone that you can talk to who will pray for you, pray with you, and serve you? Can't tell you how many times in my various roles that I've talked to somebody who has experienced something in their lives so awful, so hellish, that when asked, have you ever talked with somebody to process this? Have you ever met with a Christian counselor? Too often the answer is no. I've been keeping it inside, but I'm fine. Sometimes we need help. Sometimes we need other people to help us. Are you in one of the small groups that we have here at TAF? We have a Thursday night Bible study. We now have a women's Bible study. We're about to have men's. We have Thursday night men's basketball. Sorry, Phil, for that scratch. Are you involved in one of our groups? Or are you flying solo, thinking that you can do it all by yourself? You see, the prophet's prophet, Elijah, couldn't do it by himself. Neither can you. God wants you on a team, and he wants you in a family. That's what we are here at TAF. We're a team and a family. He wants you surrounded. Sometimes what we need most is people to do life with us, to walk with us, talk with us, to listen to us, to put their arms around us and pray for us. Rejoice when we rejoice, weep when we weep. How many of you remember ESPN sportscaster Stuart Scott? Stuart battled cancer and lost. And I remember his speech from when he won the Jimmy B Award. There's this wonderful line in that speech. He said, I have learned that you fight as hard as you can till you can't fight anymore. And then you let others fight for you. That's what God told Elijah. Elijah fought as hard as he could. And now he needed some people to come alongside and fight for it. And God is ready to provide that. God's ready to provide that for you too. Let the resources of this church help you. Elijah didn't know who to surround himself with. You may not either. But if you pray, and if you open up yourself to God's guidance, guess who does know who can help you? God does. And he will bring those people into your life. See, this is the kind of God that we have. The God who knows that the journey that we are on is too much for us. Who knows that we are weak. Who knows that we are just dust. A God who says, listen, go to bed. Take a Sabbath. Let's get some people around you and know that I love you. I'm here for you. And I want to take care of you. And this is what you need to do. To finish the race. And to finish it well. But first, we have to fill this tank of yours. And this is how you do it. So which one of these three prescriptions, the physical, the spiritual, the relational, do you need help with? Perhaps it's all three of them. Are you willing to accept that help? To admit that you can't do it by yourself? To admit that you need God to help you find that emotional stability that you need? Are you willing to avoid that emotional burnout that is so easy to do, and it affects all of us, even me? You see, I need help. I need people to come alongside me to lift me up, to help me do the work that I do. And this church has done that for me. This church will do it for you. Amen. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you for the simple steps that you have. The simple steps that are so easy to follow if we're just willing to do it. Thank you for your willingness to help fill our tanks. And God, thank you for this church that is willing to follow your prescriptions to help each other, to help lift each other up, to help us be emotionally fit for life. In Jesus' name, amen.